The air inside the cabin felt too thin, too crowded, too full of chatter that carried an undertone of superiority. He had taken the seat quietly, the way he always did. His jacket was plain, his shoes well worn, his hands bearing the scars of long years of building something no one thought he could. To most eyes, he was an ordinary man, perhaps even beneath notice. But beneath that ordinary exterior lay the silent weight of a fortune, an empire worth $2.3 billion, though he never once thought of himself as a man defined by money. To the flight attendant moving down the aisle, however, appearances were everything. She paused by his row, her manicured nails brushing the fabric of the seat as her eyes lingered on him just a little too long. There was no warmth in that gaze, only judgment. He was dressed like a construction foreman who had stumbled into the wrong cabin, out of place among the tailored suits and polished jewelry around him. "Sir," she said with a smile that was more blade than kindness, "you may be in the wrong section. This is business class." The words carried the weight of dismissal, the kind that cuts not with cruelty, but with the assumption that someone like him couldn't belong here. Passengers nearby smirked quietly, watching for his reaction. But he only looked up, his calm eyes steady, his hands resting on the armrests as though carved from stone. "This is my seat," he replied, voice even. Her smile thinned. She said, "Of course," but her tone suggested doubt. She leaned closer, lowering her voice, but not enough to hide it from the curious ears nearby. "You understand, sir, these seats are reserved for passengers who've paid premium. Sometimes people get confused." He didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The silence, steady as the heartbeat of a man unshaken, unsettled her more than argument would have. "Here's my ticket," he finally said, sliding it toward her. She glanced at it, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face when she realized he was exactly where he was supposed to be. No mistake, no accident, just a man she couldn't fit into her narrow measure of worth. "Enjoy your flight," she said, voice clipped, and moved on. The others snickered. A man across the aisle, tie loosened, whispered to his companion, "Probably scraped every dime together for one trip. Hope he enjoys his moment." He heard it. He always heard things like that. But he had long ago learned that the sharpest vengeance is not spoken. It is revealed in silence, in patience, in letting time carve its lessons into those who mock too easily. The flight continued, and she returned often, but not with the same attentiveness she offered the other passengers. She poured champagne with a flourish for the suited men who boasted about mergers, for the woman with diamond bracelets who recounted her holiday in Monaco. But when she passed him, her tone was curt, her service perfunctory. "Water?" she asked once, holding it out as though it were charity. He accepted it with a nod, nothing more. Hours later, turbulence shook the cabin and fear rippled among the passengers. He remained still, gaze fixed on the storm outside the window. The others fidgeted, murmuring prayers or grasping armrests. The flight attendant's mask cracked as she stumbled, her hand gripping the seat back beside him. For the first time, her eyes betrayed uncertainty, fear, the kind that leveled all distinctions between rich and poor, powerless and powerful. He looked at her, calm. She turned away quickly, embarrassed. When the plane finally steadied, relief spread like a wave, but his stillness remained unchanged. The attendants resumed their practiced motions, the hum of service returning, as though nothing had happened. Yet something had shifted inside her. She felt his presence now, not as an intruder in her curated world, but as someone who unsettled the very foundation of her judgments. She didn't know why. She didn't know that beneath the plain jacket
was a man whose empire stretched across continents, whose companies employed thousands, whose name, if spoken, would silence the mockery instantly.
But he chose silence. When the plane landed, the passengers hurried off, eager to step back into their lives. The attendant offered her final rehearsed farewells, but when he passed, she did not meet his eyes. Perhaps shame had begun to take root, or perhaps she was simply eager to erase him from her memory. What she didn't know, what no one on that plane knew, was that the journey had not ended, it had only begun. For the very next day, the flight attendant would be called to a private reception at her airline's headquarters. It was not common for someone in her position to be summoned, but the airline had announced a major new investor, one who had just secured a controlling stake in their struggling company. All employees were expected to attend the welcome. She entered the hall nervously, surrounded by executives and pilots in crisp uniforms. A low murmur filled the air as the crowd buzzed with curiosity. Who was this investor? What kind of man had the power to shift the fate of an entire airline with a single decision? The curtains parted, and a man stepped onto the stage. Her heart stopped. It was him. The same man she had dismissed, mocked, reduced to an outsider on her flight. Now standing tall, his voice carried across the hall with the calm authority of someone who had never needed to prove himself, but who commanded respect without asking. "Ladies and gentlemen," the CEO said beside him, "please welcome Mr. Elias Ward, our new majority shareholder. His vision and leadership will shape the future of this airline." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Executives clapped with practiced enthusiasm. And she stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, her face draining of color. Because at that moment, she understood. The man she had mocked as unworthy, as someone who didn't belong, now owned the very company that signed her paychecks, and he had remembered her. He did not smile. He did not gloat. His eyes, steady and unshaken, passed over the crowd until they found her. For one heartbeat too long, they held her in place. A quiet acknowledgement, a reminder, a mirror of her own pettiness reflected back at her, now magnified under the weight of truth. She wanted to vanish, but there was nowhere to go. The empire had spoken, and its voice was louder than any insult she could have imagined. The applause still thundered through the hall, though to her ears it sounded hollow, distant, suffocating. She clapped too, but her hands trembled, her palms slicked with sweat. She hoped no one saw. She prayed his gaze would move on, but Elias Ward's eyes had already found her, and the silence between them carried more weight than the noise of the crowd. After the speeches, employees swarmed him. Executives fawned, managers shook hands, pilots offered congratulations. The room bent around him like gravity itself had shifted. Yet he moved with the same calm presence as he had on the plane, steady, unmoved by flattery, his smile reserved but genuine when he chose to offer it. She tried to stay hidden among her colleagues, but fate is cruel to those who try to bury shame. "Stewardess," the CEO called suddenly, spotting her in the back, "please bring Mr. Ward a drink." Her blood ran cold. Eyes turned toward her. She forced a smile, stepping forward with the practiced grace of her profession, but inside she was unraveling. She picked up a glass of champagne and walked toward him, the same steps she had taken countless times on flights, but never had they felt so heavy. Never had the air seemed so thick. When she reached him, her hand trembled as she offered the glass. "Mr. Ward," she said, voice tight. He looked at her, and for a moment the world fell away. His eyes were calm, unreadable, but in them she saw everything she feared: recognition, memory, judgment not spoken but carved in silence. He took the glass. "Thank you," he said, his voice even, polite. But it struck her harder than any reprimand. She wanted him to yell, to scold, to shame her publicly. That she could have endured. What she could not endure was his restraint, the quiet weight of a man who did not need to raise his voice to expose her.
For the rest of the night, she avoided his gaze, but she could feel it, like a shadow she could not escape. And then, the real revenge began. Within weeks, changes swept through the airline. New policies were announced, training programs were overhauled. Employees whispered about the new standards, about the scrutiny now placed on customer service, about the sudden rise in accountability. Elias had made it clear, arrogance and prejudice had no place in his company. Every attendant, every pilot, every manager would be held to the highest measure, not of appearances, but of respect. She sat in the training room, listening to instructors emphasize kindness, humility, dignity. Every word felt like a dagger, not because of the principles themselves, but because she knew why they were being spoken. She knew she had become the unspoken example, the silent cautionary tale. Colleagues whispered when she passed. Rumors spread that one attendant had disrespected Mr. Ward on a flight. They never said her name aloud, but in their eyes she saw the truth. They knew. One evening, unable to carry the weight any longer, she wrote him a letter. Her words spilled with desperation, apologies, explanations, pleas for forgiveness. She told him she had judged too quickly, that she had let the uniform and the title blind her to the dignity of others. She told him she was sorry. Days passed with no reply. And then, one morning, she was called in to the executive office. Her heart pounded as she walked the long corridor. Inside, Elias Ward sat with the CEO and several directors. His presence filled the room without effort, his calm gaze locking onto hers as she entered. "Please," he said, gesturing for her to sit. She lowered herself into the chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He spoke quietly, but his words cut through the silence like thunder. "Do you know why you are here?" She swallowed. "Because of what I did? Because of how I treated you?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, but it is not about me. It is about everyone else you've treated the same way. You see, money builds companies, but respect builds empires. Without respect, everything falls." Tears pricked her eyes. She tried to speak, but no words came. He continued, "I am not here to destroy you. That would be too easy. I am here to remind you and everyone who wears this uniform why humility matters. People carry battles you cannot see. Some look ordinary. Some do not shine the way you expect. But every person who walks into that cabin deserves dignity. Do you understand?" She nodded, the tears spilling now. "I will not fire you. You will remain. But you will change. You will rebuild the respect you broke. Not for me, for them." He gestured toward the window where the airport bustled with passengers boarding flights, strangers carrying their own hidden stories. She wept openly, her shame complete. From that day on, she was different. Her colleagues noticed. Passengers noticed. She treated everyone, whether in designer suits or worn-out jackets, with the same warmth, the same care. She learned their names, listened to their stories, carried herself with humility. But the memory never left her. Every time she saw Elias Ward on a company poster, or heard his name in board updates, or read about his expanding empire in the news, she remembered the plane, the moment she mocked a man she thought beneath her, and the silence that followed, a silence that grew into her greatest lesson. Elias never spoke of her publicly. He never revealed her name, never used his power to humiliate her. His revenge was quieter, deeper, more enduring. It was in the way he reshaped the company's culture, in the way her colleagues looked at her, in the way her own conscience gnawed at her endlessly. Years later, when she trained new attendants, she always told them the same thing. Never judge a passenger by appearances. You don't know their story. You don't know their struggles. You don't know their power. Treat them with respect, always. And when the recruits asked her why, she would smile faintly, her heart heavy with memory, and say, "Because one day your empire might be seated quietly in 14B."